Welcome back to the Rethink It podcast. Guys, I'm so glad you are here with me. Today, I'm talking about something near and dear to my heart. And if you guys have been listening in for any time at all, you know the only reason I am here doing a podcast and the only reason I have a clinic is because my son struggled with Lyme disease. With my medical background, I would never have I've never found myself, or I would never have projected that I would be here doing this. So he is the reason I'm here. So if you guys enjoy this podcast, give Stephen a like and a thumbs up. My thumbs up on this podcast, and tell him in the comments how much you appreciate him. He is well. But the reason we are talking today about Lyme disease is because of that. And I am bringing on a guest to this podcast today to help me bring some of this information out there. This guest is a very special guest. His name is Allan Lindsley. He is out of Wisconsin and has been working with Lyme for over 20 years. So he's definitely someone I would learn from, and probably have learned from, not even knowing it. But I learned in this podcast already today a lot of things that I didn't know, or connections I made that he put together for me. So if I had that experience, you certainly will. We talk about the gamut. We talk about how Lyme affects the body, from the GI to the joints to the brain to the heart. We've talked about the different ways that we can address Lyme and how it's important to address them in order. And we really go into Lyme in all its details. We don't talk about all the different ways to treat Lyme because there are millions. And if you are a Lyme sufferer, you know this. Most of the people I see in my clinic have spent lots of money, all their earthly resources, trying to narrow down someone who can help them. And it's because there are a dozen ways from Sunday to kill Lyme. But is that the right way to do it? Do we go ahead and just jump in and kill Lyme disease? Lyme, if we have Lyme disease, is that how we treat Lyme? These are the kind of questions we talk about today. We talk about the real approach that tends to work. And we give you guys hope. If you are suffering with Lyme, I hope this episode brings you some degree of hope. There is hope for lasting healing, and order matters. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed recording it. Hey guys, I wanted to pop in and interrupt our podcast to encourage you guys and let you guys know, if you didn't know, our book is available. Stephen's story about his struggle through Lyme disease. Our book, Kids Get Lyme Disease Too: One Boy's Journey of Trusting God Through Lyme Disease. It is available on all areas that you can get books, everything from Amazon to Barnes & Noble to everywhere in between. All the places that you pick up books, you can pick up our book. So please support us and get the word out. If you have a child that's struggling, it doesn't have to be Lyme. I know so many children who just feel weird because their health doesn't match that of their peers, and they feel isolated, they feel unseen, frustrated, and alone. This book is meant to encourage those children. It's meant to encourage you parents that you can get through it. It's meant to make you feel seen and heard and give you hope. So please pick up our book. Thank you so much for supporting our podcast and all the things that we do. You can see it's an ever emerging thing. I'm changing my studio. Today I'm wearing scrubs because this is the only time I've had to record, and I'm doing the best we can. And I appreciate that you guys are here with me at the root level, at the ground floor, as I'm trying to get information out to you guys that is valuable and hopefully life-changing, starting with the book. So pick up the book wherever you can pick up books, and thank you in advance for all your support. Well, welcome to the Rethink It podcast, Dr. Allan Lindsley. I'm so glad you are joining me this afternoon. We have a great conversation ahead of us. I have been wanting to talk about Lyme on this podcast for a while because my whole practice was built out of Lyme disease and the experience we had with it. So this is near and dear to my heart, and I'm just so tickled you're here. Let's hear a little bit about who you are and how you got to what you do.
Oh, wow. So back in the early 80s, I grew up in Wisconsin on a dairy farm, and I was truly a redneck. We had coonhounds and the whole business, and I spent a lot of time in the woods. And in 1981, 82, around this part of the world, we didn't really know what Lyme was. Had no idea.
Mm.
Never heard it, never understood it. And I got bit one summer, I believe it was 81 or 82, and my knees swelled up and I couldn't bend my knees. And my dad had asked me to hop on the tractor and go rake some hay. I couldn't even push the clutch of the tractor. And I remember going to the doctor and he feels my knees. Yeah, they're hot and they're inflamed. And he sent me home with ibuprofen. 800 milligram ibuprofen. I never forget it. Swallowing these horse pills.
Yeah, right.
And as the summer wore on, it seemed to kind of fade. And I love to exercise and run, so I didn't think about it. But I would run cross country and track and play all these sports, and I would get so fatigued at times where I just like, oh, I just need a break. And I rested a few days, I would kind of come out of it, but sometimes I wouldn't come out of it. And by the time I got into college, I had severe back problems, severe pain, and I'm just like, what? I was in great shape, wasn't doing anything wrong. I remember going into the doctor finally in my 20s after I graduated with my engineering degree, and you get your yearly physical, and they would say, your liver enzymes are elevated. You need to stop drinking. Well, I'm doing triathlons. What are you talking about? Well, come back in 3 months and stop drinking. So I come back in 3 months, and they would say to me, Mr. Lindsley, your liver enzymes are still elevated. You need to stop drinking. And I'm like, I'm not drinking. I didn't know what that was. And come
Yeah.
to find out that was probably the babesia in my liver with the other Lyme stuff there. Just, and I always say, you don't know you had a heart attack until you see the heart enzymes in the bloodstream. And
Right.
if you have something really bothering the liver, your liver enzymes are elevated. So that's what the problem was, but didn't put it together. And story progresses. When I was 30, my father was killed in a farm accident here.
Oh.
For about 5 years, I watched you're the brain person. I watched my father disappear. Mom would call me up and she's like, oh my God, Dad's doing all these crazy things. He's, and he was only in his 52 or 53. And he would just couldn't remember how to fix the equipment. He'd stand in
So
front
what
of it.
happened exactly?
I think because of what we did, we ate venison all the time. We were in the woods all the time. We got bit all the time. We both had chronic Lyme and nobody caught it. And because of his genetics, by the time he was in his 50s, it was really tearing him apart. And he would go in and complain to the doctor, that's the heart attack you had 10 years ago. And he's like, no, I felt good after that, but my joints hurt and I'm tired. And I have to take naps all the time and I can't think. And so he was on 8 or 9 medications when he passed.
Oh my gosh.
So one morning in fall, he was going to go out and do some field work, and he was we had a skid steer, a little bucket in the front, and you control it with your little. He was going to go out. It wasn't working, so he crawled underneath there. He had jacked it up incorrectly jacked it up, and he never came in for breakfast. My mom found him crushed that morning.
Oh gosh.
So I get a phone call, and I come home and help kind of, we had a dairy farm, a 50-cow dairy farm, very,
Lord.
very, very active, lots of work. So I drove back and forth to Minneapolis for 6 weeks while we figured out how to sell the cows and kind of take everything away. And so it starts to grind. I'm like, what happened? We drank out of the bulk tank. We had our own meat. We had a garden, with feed 3 Amish families, it was like,
Wow.
we did pretty natural stuff. And I had to think about it. And I said, I think the biggest part was something was, attacking my dad, and we didn't know what it was. So I was engineering at the time, and I just, how sometimes you hear that spirit kind of talking to you like, you need to do something different. I lost all joy in engineering. And so I was at my friend's place. He was a chiropractor, a pretty natural guy. And I was like, man, I just lost my passion for engineering here. I would love to know what happened to my dad. He goes, well, you should become a chiropractor. I'm like give him the alien look. I'm 30 years old. He says, yeah, you're 30 years old. You don't have any kids. You're not married. Go to school in 4 years. He says, you already talk about this all the time. You'll be good at it. So here I go get my organic chemistry, 2 years, 30 credits later, do a night school. I entered chiropractic school. And so I went and I wanted to practice natural medicine in such a way that I could probably position myself somewhere between a chiropractor and a medical doctor where you give somebody different choices. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So unbeknownst to me, I started doing the muscle testing stuff at school, learned from some really, really good doctors down there that was called applied kinesiology. And I went to Kansas on my way home. I went to school in Dallas, Texas. So about halfway home, I stopped in Wichita, Kansas, and worked for almost 3 years with a guy that was kind of mentoring me, and I wanted to learn what he knew because he used a little device. Like you have a biofeedback device.
Yeah, yeah.
I have the original one, the resonator, and you hold
Oh
vials,
gosh.
and
Oh yeah,
they
yeah,
took
yeah.
that stuff, they put it into a computer, and it became frequencies,
Oh
right?
cool.
So the old way was you held the vial to the body and you listen for the
The resonation. Yep.
resonating or the sound,
Yep,
or you
yep,
could muscle test them, the old muscle testing, hold your arm up.
yep.
But now you have these new biofeedback devices, have all the frequencies in it,
Yes.
and they pass them to the body and they look for the feedback, right? The
Yep,
reaction,
yep.
and then they can
Freaking cool.
actually invert it and treat with it. So
It's so cool.
I stopped there for 3 years, and I decided, I don't, hey, Wichita is really nice, but I want to go back to Wisconsin. I want to
Yeah,
see some hills and some trees and get out
yeah,
of the prairie.
yeah.
And so when I came back, he goes, well, you better learn that Lyme disease stuff. And I'm like, why? He goes, well, it's just all kinds of Lyme disease up there. Now, here's the funny part. I didn't know I had Lyme. I was never diagnosed with Lyme. I had these chronic stiff neck, the brain fog would come in sometimes. I'd be extremely fatigued. But I was able, even with Lyme, to be able to do triathlons in my 30s and 20s and all this stuff.
Sounds very
But
familiar.
you hit a certain point, and then you just fall every time. You get trained past this point, and you'd fall, and then
That's
you'd have to
right.
just stop everything.
Yep.
And that was kind of weird to me because you'd think if you trained, you could become better and better.
Right.
And so I came home, and he was right. Within 6 months of practicing Wisconsin, people would come in and say, "What do you know about Lyme disease?" And I'd say, "Nothing." And they would say to me, "Well, I took that doxycycline, and I it, it felt good for about a month and a half, and all my symptoms came back." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, what are your symptoms?" "Oh, I have this brain fog, and I get these headaches. They come back of my head. They come over my shoulders hurt. And if I work too hard, my back goes out, and I just feel fatigued, and I just all the zest for life is gone sometimes." I'm like,
Huh.
I feel like
Sounds
that.
like
Keep
me.
talking.
Yeah.
And so I started doing some research on it, read every book I could find on it at the time, and it was almost nothing. This is 2006, 2007.
Hmm.
It was very little out there, right?
Yeah.
And if you went, I'm close to the Mayo Clinic up here, Rochester, Minnesota,
Hmm.
and the whole theory up here was that if you had 10 days of doxycycline,
You're
it
good.
was impossible for Lyme to exist in your body.
Don't mean to
That
have, excuse my face while it makes the,
that was the standard of care, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, you did your doxy, right? Oh, you did 3 rounds of it. Oh, it can't be there. So I was at a seminar. One of the individuals that mentored me was a guy named Chris Astle-Smith. He's a DO from England.
oh
Brilliant
wow.
man,
Wow.
brilliant man. And he was at a seminar one time. He says, this little English accent. If you find the joints are not working, you should check the joints for bacteria or parasites. I'm like, parasites can get the joints. So I had his kit, and this Amish guy would come in. He says, "Yo, your adjustments don't work. They last about 3 weeks, and then I fall apart." And I'm going to show you. And then finally, I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to grab my vial for bacteria, and I'm going to just check it on them. So I'm resonating around, and I'll get to a shoulder and squeak, 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 squeak.
Oh
Not here,
wow.
squeak, squeak.
Oh wow.
So then I'm
Yeah.
going through my kit,
Hmm.
all these bacteria, staph, strep. Hey, there's a Lyme vial in there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Squeak, 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 squeak. It
Hmm.
matched the bacteria. And I
Wow.
said, I think you have residual Lyme in your joints.
Hmm.
And this is 18 years ago, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So this is a whole, and people, and then, so I'm just scanning his body, checking his heart, and moving
Hmm.
over to the other shoulder. And I get to the brain, squeak, 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 squeak,
Yeah.
squeak,
Yeah.
low back, hips, knee, every joint.
Right.
And I'm like, do your joints hurt? And he says, yeah, all my joints hurt. I said, do you ever get headaches? He goes, oh yeah, it always hurts right here. Put that vial right here. So this was my introduction into like, oh my God, Lyme wasn't no muscles, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't in the gut. It had left it, and I always say it burrows
Oh
burrows
yeah.
into to the joints, and it goes into what I call the white tissue, where it tries to find a place outside your bloodstream,
Correct. Hmm.
above the blood-brain barrier, into the spinal cord
Right.
sometimes, always into the joints. And
Yep.
now it says, wow, I really like it here. I've got food.
Yep.
I've got oxygen, and
Yep.
I've got very little immune system.
Yeah.
I don't have a circulating immune system, so I think I
Correct.
can live here. And they
Hmm.
do. And
Yes.
this is like my start of Lyme's, and I started checking myself, and I was like, oh my God, I've got Lyme. And then
Oh,
so I started playing with different herbs. And back then it was if you were an herbalist, you used this herb for this and this herb for that.
right.
So I had just come home from a seminar, and I had a kit of 300 herbs.
Oh, wow.
I thought, if I take this vial, like
Right.
biofeedback does, and it
Right.
speaks on me, and I take this herb and I put it with it, and I hold those two there, if it goes quiet, I bet that herb would
Yep.
help that
That
eliminate
one.
that bacteria.
Right.
So I went through all 300 of these for Lyme, and we ended up with like 12 or 14 herbs that quieted it. It was really interesting. They weren't all killers, like, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
pathogen ones. Some of them were liver supporters, some were kidney supporters.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Interesting.
well, isn't that interesting? The body wants help
Yep.
with moving it,
Out. Moving.
detoxifying it,
Right.
making it water soluble, and getting it out,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
also driving the pathogen load down. And so we started with that one, and then kept reading about this Babesia, and that was not even on the radar in 2007, 2008, because they had the ELISA test and the Western blot, right?
Right. Right.
And if those didn't test with 5 bands, then you were totally
Right.
okay. You had no
You're not
problem
allowed no
after that.
Lyme. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a false
Fine.
positive. What's that mean?
Yeah.
We've got Lyme bacteria DNA in your body, but you don't have Lyme. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
how's that?
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably because these bacteria had entered into the white tissue and the synovial fluid up in the brain, and they're
Mm-hmm.
excreting that neurotoxin that I track often as ammonia. That's one of the first
100%.
toxins I find, and
So
so
bad.
I would track that, and I'd only find the ammonia, of course, so I call it bug poop. Where you find the
Yep.
bug, you
Bug
find the
poop.
bug poop.
Yep.
And we started tracking this, and so I slowly learned about Babesia, and I tested herbs for that, and then Bartonella, and Ehrlichia, and the Anaplasmosis grouping. So there's just, and I've got a whole kit like of 60 in it, and so we made mixed vials up after a while.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
And what mixed vials did for me, because I don't have the biofeedback machine, was I could take all the Borrelia and scan all 12 or 15 Borrelia, and then I could
Mm-hmm.
scan all the Babesia, and then
Mm-hmm.
scan all the Bartonella. And what's interesting, I always say the same herbs seem to help the same family.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have yourself, your brother, a couple cousins, I call them,
Mm-hmm.
and so I always say, let's see what flavor you have today.
Mm-hmm.
And my joke is, with most people, you can function and live with one form of Lyme. You will struggle if you have 2,
Mm-hmm.
and you will go dead backwards if you have 3. And
Mm-hmm.
in my area here, we don't see a lot of rickettsia, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We see a lot of Lyme, a lot of Babesia, a lot of Bartonella, and the
Mm-hmm.
severe ones with the anaplasmosis that have the terrible headaches and the high fever.
Mm-hmm.
They're usually in the urgent care, and Doxy does do a really good job of helping those people out. But
Yeah.
the other ones seem to burrow in and hide, and they'll just take turns at you.
They will.
It's just
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My exposure to Lyme was more medical, so I had learned Northeast U.S. I had learned the stages, that there was the acute phase of Lyme, right, and where you have the symptoms and you get treated, and that there was the latent phase, right, the disseminated latent, where there's this, spreading across the organ systems,
Right.
and then this tertiary stage where now it's in the brain. And what I always thought was weird was syphilis looked like that, acute, disseminated, or,
And interesting is syphilis is a
tertiary.
spirochete, and Borrelia is a spirochete, and
Yeah,
they act the same, move the same, and probably excrete the same.
right.
It's interesting. And I don't know what you treat syphilis with. Um, Probably an antibiotic, but it
Yep.
seems
Big
like
dose
the
penicillin G in the butt. Yeah.
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 So what's interesting about it is I think you probably have the same thing where you're at, is that for years I was really put down by the medical system around here, because they just said that chronic Lyme did not exist, and I was a blatant liar to all these people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But the interesting part is, when we would help them remove the pathogens from their body that we were finding in the Lyme category, and get rid of the neurotoxins, and then help the mitochondria out, almost everybody got well.
Yeah. So I'm making
So
things
I
up,
guess
but
that
people are
could
getting
be,
better.
well, if that's placebo, I'm all about it. But
Yeah.
and what I've learned over the years is that Lyme can be very seasonal. And we're in Wisconsin here, and we maybe have vitamin D for 3 months of the year.
Right, right,
You know,
right.
at the end of May, it's in the 70s, and June, July, and August, people might get outside. And then September, I always say the vitamin D goes with the sun back to Texas or Florida, and we don't see it anymore.
Yeah,
And every fall, I would see a flare up of Lyme in October, November, December.
that makes sense.
And I'd be like, huh, what? So I said, oh, I wonder if it's your thyroid, because the fall comes, the temperature drops from 70 to 20 below, by the time you get December, maybe that's you just struggling, and it's energy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I figured out after a long, long time, I watched Dr. Bruce Hollister, I believe. He's a studied vitamin D for 40 years. Um, I saw this interview a while back. He was talking about how the cells need vitamin D on a daily basis, and
Yep.
and how the parent form of vitamin D from the sun or from oral vitamin D, for about 24 hours, every cell can access that vitamin D. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, only your kidneys can access it, because you attach a protein to it and you put it in that storage form for the reservoir.
Right.
And he said, you have to tell your patients. So I tell all my patients, look, you need to take it on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And he was saying 70 to 85. And he said, if we took a person and put them back on the equator for 6 months, had them wear a t-shirt and a pair of shorts, and we're in the sun an hour a day, he said the average vitamin D would be running between 80 and 110.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Around here, you would be crucified if you had your patients at 110. That would be like every medical doctor, for the most part, would say that's toxic. But
Yeah.
yet, isn't that interesting? If you live there, that's where you normalize.
Right.
The
Right.
joke is, if you stayed in Africa thousands of years ago, your skin got darker and you accommodated to the sun every day. If you
Mm-hmm.
decided you were bored and walked north to Norway and your skin got lighter and took a boat across,
Right.
you had a shorter window of vitamin D. And so I see that we have tons of MS,
Yeah.
obviously, up here, like 10 times more than they do in Florida and Texas. And
Mm-hmm.
and they have ticks in Texas too, but it seems like the vitamin D just plummets in the fall. And
Mm-hmm.
these bugs are so smart. They know
Mm-hmm.
exactly when that vitamin D hits that threshold, and there's not enough available to immune cells,
Yeah.
and it just takes off again. And that's probably
That's an
interesting. They don't
interesting, it's an
they don't have the
interesting
cold and
point.
flu season in on the equator, right? They don't have the cold
Yeah,
and flu season like we
that's right.
have in northern. Isn't that interesting?
Yes,
Because
I
they
know.
probably always have ample vitamin D. And you had a light guy on, you said a while back.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith from England was very into light, and he said an interesting thing. He said the winter blues. Do you get the winter blues in Colorado? Winter
We get
blues?
so much sun. We get more sun than Florida and California, so it's not as common, except that the days are shorter. So if you are
Yeah.
work like in the OR and anesthesia, and you go before the sunset rose up and come home before when the sunrise goes down,
Yeah.
and you never see the sun, yeah, you can get some winter blues. But we get a lot of sunlight here in Colorado, so it's not as common, say, as Ohio, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, this
One thing
northeast,
he
and
said that
probably
really was
Wisconsin. You
was
know,
interesting. He said when the sun goes south and we're this far north, he said the primary light from the sun in the wintertime is blue, that blue
That's
spectrum.
true. Hmm.
And he said, so your computer screens, as you know, your
Hmm.
lights, your phone, your TV, and the
Right.
light. So we lose the purple spectrum. And he said purple spectrum creates this feeling of vitality or vitalness, or almost like a charge in the body.
Amen.
And
Yep.
it's really true, because about middle of March, we get that purple light coming
Yep.
back, and the sun feels so
Good and revitalizing.
energizing, like, oh, there it is.
Yep.
And so a lot of people, I tell them, I said, if you can leave for a week or two and go to Florida or have some kind of full spectrum light, it really is helpful. But that's another piece of
That
it.
full spectrum light, let me tell you, I tell
That's
every
we
one of
lose it.
my
We lose it for
clients
about
they have
6
to
months
use
here.
the full spectrum light. I have a light box I recommend for people that even if they are in Colorado, because it's a full
Yeah.
spectrum light, includes the UV spectrum even, which most full
Yep.
spectrums don't.
Yeah.
And I just say you have to use this. Most people ignore me because they're like, oh, it's another thing I have to buy. And I'm like, you don't understand the value of the light and photonic energy on even how you absorb nutrition. It's like 90% of nutrition, your nutrients are absorbed by the effect that photons have on your nutrients.
That's incredible, because it seems like, and I jokingly say up here, I see, when it's 8 o'clock in the summertime here, I'm grilling a steak, mowing the lawn,
Hmm.
and then come wintertime, 8 o'clock, I'm like
Time,
Time to
time to
go
go
to.
to bed. Yeah,
But
exactly.
you can actually feel it in your amount of sleep and how vital you feel.
Right.
I'm way more energy, so it really does affect me. I can say that, and I can see it in my patients, and I
Mm-hmm.
tell them that, and it's amazing how I don't know quite how it works, but it's the immune system. Besides the vitamin D, that full spectrum light does something for the immune system that we lose. And I literally
Right.
treat more Lyme from October to March than I do from April to September,
I believe that.
unless it's a fresh
You know,
bite, because people get back outside
yeah.
and they just the body comes up, the energy comes up.
Yep.
And I always say, if you're treating someone with Lyme, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to help push down the pathogenic load, whether you're using antibiotics, herbs,
Yes.
homeopathy, rife machine,
Right.
skio machine. We're all trying to help the body drive, but I always say we also have to try to bring the cell energy back up.
That's
And
right.
that's the
That's
mitochondria
right.
part that 98% of
Huge.
doctors out there passed the boards when
Yeah.
they graduated, and
Yeah.
they forgot about it.
100%. Yeah, agreed. I think that it's an interesting point too with the vitamin D. I think what I usually tell clients is that Lyme is kind of a ubiquitous thing, that it's the exposure, the likelihood that you've been exposed is very high, but
Really
the
high.
but the chance, because there's so many ways to get it, and it's not just the deer tick, which most people say. I mean, of course, if you've been bitten by a tick, that's still a risk, but it can be
Yeah.
passed on congenitally. We say sexually transmitted, all the things,
Sexually
right?
transmitted, they
Mm-hmm.
say so, saliva.
Mm-hmm.
Mosquitoes carry a lot
Mosquitoes
too.
carry
We
it.
have a ton of
Mm-hmm.
mosquitoes here, and I read an article a few years ago. It was showing that all the biting insects, and
Mm-hmm.
almost every one of them showed a percentage of the insects that were carrying Lyme.
Right.
I
It's any
thought,
biting insect. And I
wow,
say, so if you've been, there's a very high likelihood that you have an exposure. And what we operate on is that as long as your immune system is robust and vital, that you can manage anything that comes into the body.
right.
But once we take a major hit, so like vitamin D drops off, and I actually would say, because of my anesthesia background, that that's a huge exposure risk. So like anytime you have a hit of a massive toxic load suddenly
Mhm.
from anything, and I'll just say anesthesia is one experience that would do that. You get a huge toxic burden, a whole lot of stress on the body, and say your immune system's borderline, and now you have Lyme, and that pushes you over the board, that over the edge, and that's absolutely something that can happen. And I don't think it's so. The point is that a lot of things can trigger that. I'm just biased because I have the
I
anesthesia
tell
perspective,
people,
but a lot of things can trigger that.
I tell my
Yeah.
patients that I said, the body only knows stress.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put enough stress on somebody, on your body, I said, I don't care if it's a fall in the wintertime, a death of a loved one, a
Mm-hmm.
divorce, a job change, a
Mm-hmm.
surgery,
Mm-hmm.
getting a virus,
Mm-hmm.
strong virus. I've seen it so many times. It just takes that stress, brings the body on just enough that I don't care if it's shingles, uh, Lyme reoccurring, Epstein-Barr, all these are all waiting in the wings, and they're
Mm-hmm.
just waiting for that chance. And hey, how's she doing? How's he doing? Oh, he's
Mm-hmm.
really weak today. What do you think? Yeah, and they
Yeah.
I'm back on board, and I've seen it happen so many times after COVID virus comes through, where people will just be clearing the hurdle on that one. All of a sudden, they'll aches and pains will come back, and they'll come in
Right.
and say, can you check me for Lyme? Well, what's going on? So I had a really bad strong virus, whether it's influenza or COVID, they feel much the same. And sure enough, almost every time it'll reactivate. So we've
Mm-hmm.
learned, and as if you have ways around that by making
Right.
sure that they're taking the vitamin D in the wintertime, and they've got some
Mm-hmm.
vitamin C coming in. But it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing how so many people are just on that hairy edge of having that reoccurrence there. And somebody
Mm-hmm.
asked me, said, well, do you ever really get rid of Lyme completely? I said, that's a great question. I said, I've
Yeah, I
been
get that
living with my
question a
body
lot.
for almost 15 years now. And I said, I have months that I feel amazing. And I said, but if I get run down, I said, I said, I think it's probably like a virus. You know how if you get chicken pox as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
that virus goes dormant in your nerve cells, and it just hangs out. And then when you get run down, we call it shingles, right? It comes
Mm-hmm.
back in. I think Epstein-Barr is very much the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we can take pathogens and we can make them go dormant potentially forever. Maybe you can wipe it out completely.
Mm.
And so I don't try to go crazy when I'm treating someone for Lyme or helping them with it, where I'm trying to break biofilms and just get in there and kill like crazy.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
first want them to feel good again. Hey,
Mm.
let's just get to the point where you're not having any joint pain, you're not having any brain fog.
Mhm. Mhm.
You actually feel excited about life again, and you
Yeah,
got
yeah,
some
yeah.
energy. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
we
yeah.
can talk about maybe digging a little bit deeper, because I think if you have a level of resistance there or immune function, you can keep almost
Yeah.
even cancer's that way, as
Mhm.
if you, and they say that cancer is a high mitochondrial function. So anything that's driving the mitochondrial function down,
Yeah.
cancer has more of a chance to get at you.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. What's the connection with parasites and Lyme?
Ooh. Well, what's interesting about parasites, when I see parasites they're, why do we call them a parasite? Because they take from you and give you nothing in return. Well, they give you a
Mhm.
lot of toxins. And
Yeah.
it's
Give you
funny, when I look
ammonia,
for
bug
parasites,
poop.
bug poop,
Yeah.
it seems like the parasites like to live where the iron is stored or where the iron enters the body. So
Mm.
intestinal parasites are common, and then liver. So
Mhm.
you see a lot of the liver flukes, that trematode family living in
Mhm.
the liver system. And
Mhm.
that's exactly where Babesia likes to hide. It likes that. I always say that that's its home. That's its nest, is there. So it seems like the parasites are able to take the mitochondria down by excreting a neurotoxin in the system, but they also steal iron. So you see a lot of ferritin dysfunction in people. I
Uh-huh.
don't know if you see it in
All
your
the
patient.
time.
But
All the time.
sometimes you'll see the maybe a ferritin normal would be let's say 80 to 120, in that range
Yeah.
right there. And then you have some come in, they got a ferritin of 400, and
Mhm.
they're a pretty hot mess, and they've got
Mhm.
all the symptoms of Lyme going on, and maybe
Mhm.
Babesia. And as you help them release or remove or drive the pathogenic load down, all of a sudden their ferritin comes back down. But somebody
Mhm.
who's been just grinding it out for maybe years,
Mhm.
they come in, their ferritin 7,
Yes.
10,
10.
12.
Yes.
How you doing? "Oh, I can't even shower.
Yeah.
So-" And
Yeah.
so what was interesting about that is you can give them all the iron you want, but Morley Robbins wrote that book called Cure Your Fatigue a while back, maybe
Yeah.
just a few years ago.
Yep.
And it reopened a lot of thought in my mind about, oh, he started talking about copper in there,
Mhm.
and
Copper
how back in the
deficiency.
50s and the 60s you would
Yeah.
do liver to get rid of an anemia.
Right.
And he talks about, the ceruloplasmin and all this
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
I like some of the things that Morley says, and I can agree and
Mhm.
I can disagree,
Yeah.
only because I know I've been doing this 20 years now. I'm in my 21st year of practice.
Mhm.
I've done over 100,000 patient visits now. And when you do something over and over again, as you
Mhm.
see patterns.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then you apply maybe a little protocol here, a little something here, and then you
Mhm.
see results, or you don't see results, and you go, what could
Yep.
I change here? What could I do differently?
Yeah.
And so it was a game changer a couple years ago when I started seeing all of the dysfunction in the body. And we'll talk about that in a second. But what I started seeing is a lot of young athletes coming in with
Mhm.
chronic joint problems.
Yep, yep.
I'm talking like they're like, "Oh, I've been running cross country and my knees are always sore." And
Mhm.
so, me being the guy that does lots of Lyme, I go, let me check for Lyme. And I check for Lyme, and often it would be there. And I get rid of it, and we get them, say I wanted to get them here, or I got them here.
Mhm.
They say, they don't hurt as much, but there's still some swelling in there. And I'm perplexed, and so I do muscle testing. I muscle
Right.
test individual muscles. I'd be checking the quad muscle, and it would be weak, and the hamstrings, and the
Mhm.
the G meat, all these muscles that would hold the pelvis together,
Yeah.
they're weak. And I'm like, what is going on here?
Mhm.
And then I started seeing people come in with these young kids, athletes,
Mhm.
ACL tear,
Yep.
ACL,
Yep.
Achilles tendon rupture,
Yep.
labrum tear, and
Yep.
and I said to the mom or the dad, I said, well, what's low? They play sports year round. I'm like, yep, so did I. Yeah, they're just pushing too hard. I'm like, hmm. So my joke is I listened to them, and I said, if they were pushing too hard, then their thumb should be shot from running their cell phone all the time, right?
Right, right, right. It's true. That's hilarious, but
This one
true.
should be shot right here, right?
Right, right,
So,
right.
but So about a year and a half ago, I had a young man come in about 17, and he had just torn his ACL in his left knee for the second time. And his mom was
Jeez.
more than excited when she walked in my office.
Yeah.
And he sits down, he's on his crutches, big brace, and I said, "What's going on?" And it's the first time I'd seen him. She was a patient. She'd had some Lyme stuff going on, and so she was a patient of mine. And she said, "You need to figure this out." And I'm like, "Well, what happened?" And so he tells me the story that he was playing basketball. He went up for a rebound. When he came down, his knee just exploded.
Whew.
And I said, did somebody hit you on the way down, or, kind of take you up, lay up?
Yeah,
And he said,
yeah.
"No, clean, clean." I said, "So then what happened?" He says, "Well, I went in, they replaced my ACL,
Oh,
fixed my
jeez.
new ACL, fixed my meniscus, two
Yeah,
ligaments later, and I
yeah.
did 9 months of rehab on my
Mm-hmm.
knee,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave me a pat in the back and said, 'You're good to go.'" I said,
Mm.
"So then what happened?" He said, "I started kind of playing ball again, and 2 months into it, I went up for rebound, I came down, and my knee exploded again."
Oh, no. Oh, jeez.
And this kid is 210 pounds of twisted steel.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
he's 6'1", just
Strong.
muscles everywhere. And I'm like, okay, he's obviously he's very
He's
fit, he's
fit.
well muscled. I'm
He's
thinking, what's going
balanced
on here?
muscularly. Yeah.
Yeah, he's
It's
just
not like a.
you look at him, you go, wow, what a physique.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were in to see a second surgeon already, and the second surgeon says, "Oh, the first guy did it wrong. The angle was wrong on the." And I'm like, I said to the mom, I said, "Look, I bet that guy does 15 of those a week. I don't think that the first guy did it wrong."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "I've seen this before. This is not the first time I've seen this. I've never been able to figure it out." So I took a step back and I said, "Let me just do a different exam on him today." So I went to the knee. I checked every muscle around the knee. The quad muscle was absolutely weak. The
Mm.
hamstrings, the backside were weak. And the flexor muscles in the hip were weak. So there was literally every muscle. And a lot of people forget that tendons hold muscles onto bone, right? So
Mm-hmm. Right.
tendons hold muscles onto bone.
Correct.
Ligaments
Mm-hmm.
hold bone to
Bone to
bone.
bone. Mm-hmm.
So what I was discovering is that if I worked on his muscles a little bit, I do a lot of origin insertion work on the ligaments and tendons. I would find that muscles often pick back up almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the tendons we have what they call little GTOs, Golgi tendon organs, and when
Yep.
you know a good tendon function is cross-linked
Mm-hmm.
and it's got stretchiness to it. I should
Mm-hmm.
have my spring. I always show my patients my spring. A
Right.
good collagen, and a third of your body's collagen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It should stretch, compress, bend, twist, and
Right.
always come back to position and not tear.
Right.
And it's stronger than steel. So
Right.
it should be amazingly strong. We should be able to jump, twist.
Yeah.
And so what we've seen over the last 40 years, we've seen athletes go from contact injuries to non-contact. Have you noticed that out there? Where
Yes. Yes.
there's all these
Yes.
non-contact. I think 80
Yeah.
plus percent of injuries in sports are non-contact.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, just in the NFL, I always reference Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins the same year, ripping their Achilles out of their heel and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ACL tears. And so I'm evaluating him, and I have little vials, and I can kind of go around the body. And the common thing I find is wherever the Lyme is hiding the body, whether it's the joints or the in the brain or anywhere in the body, you often find that the body's not converting ADP to ATP.
ATP.
It's the vial will show you that they're having a hard time making energy. And I just read
Interesting.
Morley's book. I was
Yeah.
going down and teach 100 doctors collagen dysfunction and
Mm-hmm.
glyphosate and how it
Mm-hmm.
tends to strip the copper from the tissue.
Correct.
And Morley re-triggered a thought in my mind. He says, every cell in the body has a minimum of 30 million copper atoms. And I'm like,
Correct.
never
Mm-hmm.
learned that before.
Yeah, I
And
know.
he
You
says,
don't.
and they're in complex 4. And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember that because I had made my own chart years ago of the whole mitochondria, and I teach off
Right.
of my clinic. And I was like, I wonder if because here's the other thing I would find is that I'd find Lyme in the joints.
Yep.
I'd find low energy in the joints.
Yep.
I'd find glyphosate in the joints. Okay.
Right.
Like, not the muscles, because muscles have good blood supply.
Right.
Good
Right.
to liver. Liver turns it into a water soluble form, and the kidneys will filter it out with the urine.
Right. Right.
But in the collagen, what we found is that, 1/3 of your body's collagen, 32%, 28 types of
Right.
collagen, hair, skin, nails,
Yeah.
ligaments, tendon.
Yeah.
Bone is 90% collagen.
Yeah.
What we were finding through all the testing I was doing, working with my friends at Cellcore when I was teaching with them, was that when I was checking the patients out, I'd find glyphosate in the joints, and I would try to help them get rid of it with binders and
Mm-hmm.
humics and fulvics climb up to light and other things that I could get it to move about so far, and then it would
Mm-hmm.
stop. Like
Uh-huh.
it just can't get it completely. I could get it wouldn't go all the way
Right.
down. So I was sitting in front of Don Huber. He's a Dr. Don Huber. He's out in Nampa area out there in Boise area, and he's 90 this month.
Wow.
Writing papers.
I
I'm
love
sitting out. I'm sitting there
that.
talking to him, and he knows more about herbicides. He's a PhD agronomist, and I was explaining to him. He says, says you think it's locally there, or do you think it's? He said, is it accumulation, or is it gotten into the tissue? And I said, I said, I think it's getting into the tissue because glyphosate is a glycine molecule with a phosphate.
Correct.
Glyphosate, it's a synthetic amino acid,
Right.
and the body has no enzymatic machine to break it down. That's why it all
Right.
goes through the kidneys, right? We
Correct.
can't break it down, so we have to make it water soluble.
Mm-hmm.
So glycine, and so this is an interesting thing. All collagen in our body, 1/3 of our body,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what kind of collagen you make, every third amino acid is glycine.
Right.
Glycine,
Mm-hmm.
something, let's say lysine, let's say proline, glycine, lysine, proline. We make a chain.
Yes.
We make 3 chains. That's called a triple helix. We twist it together,
Mm-hmm.
like a cable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we cross-link it with little they call them shift bonds, which is a little, I believe it's a sugar bond. And it's little copper, little manganese bonds that I call them little springs. When I draw it for my patients, I put little springs between the collagen fibers, and I say, this is what normal collagen should do. It should stretch.
Right.
But what seems to be happening, and Anthony Samsel's a researcher on the East Coast, he hypothesized with Dr. Stephanie Seneff a while back in a paper that he thought glyphosate was displacing glycine collagen chain.
Right.
And I absolutely believe it's 100% true.
I agree.
Fingernail clippings and stuff, they find it in the
That's
actual
right.
collagen.
Mm-hmm.
When it does that, it's got an affinity for copper. Some people say it's higher, but I talked to Don about it. It's about 10,000 times stronger for copper. So glyphosate, when it sees
Glyphosate is 10,000 times stronger
10,000 times the affinity for copper, then
Wow.
let's use the example of magnesium.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when it walks in the room, if glyphosate walks in and I'm copper and you're magnesium, it will bind to me 10,000 times before it touches magnesium molecule. And so it steals it from the mitochondria, the electron transport chain, and it steals it from the crossing of the collagen. So what I really realized after seeing thousands of people come in with this, I found that 2 things are happening. Lyme loves the joints because if I can strip the copper out of the electron transport chain, the body cannot make enough energy in that cell to regenerate itself between jumps and lands. And the other part of it is that how white blood cells use mitochondria also. They have about maybe, I think it's 200 mitochondria per cell.
Right.
So the white blood cells that live locally in the collagen also experience the same copper deficiency.
Oh, wow. And then you get immune dysfunction. Holy crap.
So here's what's interesting. If I strip the copper out of the electron transport chain in the white blood cells, they don't have the energy to fight.
do anything. Yeah, they can't do anything.
Just don't do any more there.
Yeah,
I think you have 3 things going on there. You have the copper being stripped out of the electron transport chain in the cells, so they can't regenerate fast enough between practices, right? We should go to practice and lift our weights, and we should wear ourselves out, and we should do a little micro tearing, go home, eat a really good meal, full of minerals, go to bed, wake up, and we should have repaired, right?
Correct.
That's what it was. And I say that because I grew up on this dairy farm. Actually, I'm sitting right here on an old dairy farm, and that's where I have my clinic now. And get up in the morning, we would do physical chores, make hay bales and scraping pens. And my dad would say, "Well, breakfast is done. Let's go pick some rock here, and you can get that 4 loads of hay baled and get it stacked, and then you can go to football practice." And like, okay. So we would have often 8 or 10 hours of physical labor in before we would go to football practice and run the drills for an hour and a half, lift a few weights, come home, eat supper, do evening chores, and go to bed. And I often wouldn't make 10 o'clock because I'd be falling in the chair at 9:30 because I was so physically exhausted.
Yeah.
But we didn't have the tearing. We didn't have any of that tearing going on. And so when parents tell me, "Oh, my child is just being pushed so hard," I'm like, no way. Absolutely not. because a trained athlete should be very resistant to the actual tearing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So when we would go from 0 to 60 in August because we'd be on the farm doing work, then we'd go to these football practices 2 a day.
Right.
Oh my gosh, and you would feel it for a few weeks and you kind of
Yeah.
move through that.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
said we saw broken bones and we sprained our ankles.
Right.
But I never saw in 4 years of sports, playing 3, 4 sports, I never saw an ACL tear, a meniscus tear, a labrum
Right.
tear,
It's
Achilles
common.
tendon tear,
So
somebody
ridiculously
pitching
common now.
having ulnar collateral damage,
Yeah.
Tommy John syndrome.
Yeah, yeah.
Never saw it.
Yeah.
Never saw it. And so I try to explain to people how the cells make energy, and you understand this really well. But I say, you know how we use copper wiring in the walls? Copper wire. And I said, a copper wire the size of my pinky here could probably pull 200 amps into a house, run the whole house. I said, so all we're doing in the copper wiring is we're just moving electrons. The
Yes.
bigger the wire, the more electrons we can travel down that wire. So
Right.
copper is a great conductor.
Correct.
And I said, we're just copying what God did a long time ago. We're just
100%.
electron
Amen.
transport chain. The electron transport chain has CoQ10, copper, energy.
Right.
And I said, if you don't have the copper there, you can't finish the pathway.
So I'm just
And
going to pause for a second and just give a fill-in just for information on biology, because we're talking a lot of this electron transfer chain might be completely foreign to the non-biology ears, which I have a tendency to talk like that, and then people have to remind me that I'm not talking to doctors and scientists. But, so ultimately what we do to make our energy is we take our macronutrients, our proteins, our carbohydrates, and our fats, and we throw them through a series of breakdown and enzymes and utilization of minerals into something called the Krebs cycle. This happens it's what our mitochondria is doing. And I think also the endoplasmic reticulum is involved a little bit in this as well. But we throw that through a cycle called the citric acid cycle, which everybody had to see at one point, at least in 8th or 9th grade. We saw it, we looked at it and said, boy, that's complex. I'm not looking at it again, And even
really scary when you
in
first look
PA
at it,
school,
right?
I looked at it and I was like, I don't need to know this. But man, that's how we make our energy. But we don't make the majority of our energy there. From there, we enter the electron transfer chain where we actually make more ATP and electrons. And that's how our body is producing energy at the cellular mitochondrial basic powerhouse function. Did I miss anything on that?
No, I think the main thing is that oxygen is used in the electron. That's the only place oxygen is used in the body, in the electron transport chain. So when you're exercising and you're trying to run a really fast lap around the track, as fast as you can go, one lap, and that last 100 yards, you feel your body run out of oxygen. You feel the lactic acid build up, because when you run out of oxygen, the whole system backs up. The body says, well, I'll just make lactic acid out of the energy trying to be created for the next 10 seconds so this guy or gal will stop. And then the body reverses the lactic acid, and you can burn it through the Krebs cycle or burn it through other pathways again.
Right.
So the body has this buffering system for lactic acid. And so the whole idea, I guess I was trying to make before I got too deep there, is we have copper wires in the wall to make energy. That's how we move power, and we're moving electrons, and we're doing the exact same thing in our cells. But there's a copper deficiency in the mitochondria.
Correct.
And we have about 800 mitochondria per muscle cell. We have 3,000 to 4,000 mitochondria per heart cell. And you probably know this, and maybe I hear all kinds of different things, but like 1 million per neuron. It's just crazy numbers in the brain. It doesn't take much to harm the brain when Lyme is there. I read an article one time, the person was saying in the article that 5% drop in energy in the brain can cause a seizure, brain fog, or any neurological issue to start up. And I was like, 5%. And we forget that the brain uses, if I take a breath in, 20% oxygen goes to the brain. If I eat a bologna sandwich, 20% of the calories go to the brain. And so it's that little 2-3 pound mass is a very hungry thing. So what Lyme often does is disrupts the energy of the cells of the brain, and you start to suffer.
Correct.
And I always say when the body gets tired enough and there's a toxin living there long enough, and you get so tired you begin to swing at yourself by accident, you create that autoimmune. And we talked about this earlier, is that's when I start seeing the MS, the ALS, the Parkinson's, dementia, That's the
Ehlers-Danlos.
brain stuff. And when it's in the joints, if you
Yeah.
have the right genetics and the right bacteria there, and there's
Mm-hmm.
you see the rheumatoid start
The
there. Figuring you can
rheumatoid
have
issues.
twins. One doesn't get exposed to the bacteria, but has the genes. The other twin gets exposed to the bacteria. This twin has the full-blown rheumatoid, and this one has none. And I've
Mm-hmm.
seen it over and over again in my patients, and there's always that trigger.
Right.
And so it's pretty amazing. So what we figured out with this young boy is, I'll finish my story and that I get carried
Yeah.
away, is that I said to him, I said, I started testing him and I found that we needed the copper there
Right.
for the energy pathway.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I think I finally figured this out after literally 10 years of looking for this and thousands of people coming through. I
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm going to go up front, I'm going to grab some elemental copper. And we had a cream we developed. It's called
Mm-hmm.
joint ligament cream.
Mm-hmm.
We changed the name out just recently, but it
Mm-hmm.
was for the joints.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never put copper, so I put some copper in there. And I said, take this home. I'm going to see you in 2 months, and I'm going to see how you're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
so he came back in 2 months, and the energy was about 50% better than the joints. Some of the muscles had stayed on,
Wow.
and the Lyme was completely gone. I said, looking good. So I go through and I plug the tendons back in. I fix all the muscles, and I said, I'll see you in 4 months. He comes in 4 months, and this was the interesting part. I could take my little vial at ADP. It could go all over the body, and he was
Mm-hmm.
completely converting into energy everywhere. He didn't have a spot in his body where he wasn't converting anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, you've used the cream? Yep. You take a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of copper every day. I had him on 4 or 6 milligrams of copper. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, you're looking great. I said, how are you feeling after surgery? He said, I'm really doing well this time. And of course, he doesn't know what's going on. I'm seeing it with the chemistry.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
comes in at 6 months. How you doing? Great. How's therapy going? I'm done.
Huh.
You're
Wow.
done. Did you go 9 months last time? Yeah, I was done in 5.5 months this time. I said, how'd you get out? He said, I had full range of motion, no pain, and all the strength
Wow.
they wanted me to push around. So they released me 3.5 months early. So I'm
Wow.
checking him now. This is 6 months out.
Yeah.
I check the muscles in his arms and his legs. I'm pushing on him.
Yeah.
I can't break him anywhere.
Wow.
I'm like,
That's incredible.
this is the problem because he was able to cross-link the fibers with the copper. He was able to run the mitochondria.
Yeah, that
And in
copper,
five and
man.
a half months, he had fully repaired the ACL.
I tell people
Isn't that
that all
crazy?
the time.
So,
I've had people come to my office who've had those freaking iron infusions and they're iron deficient and they're like, I mean, don't I need to be on iron? And I said, no. Iron is toxic if given in any form. Your body doesn't
so
know how to utilize it. You need the copper to mobilize the iron.
yeah, they
And
work
yeah,
together.
yeah.
And so the
Mm-hmm.
funny part was his mom had come along, and when she came in the first time, this was very first part of October, a year and a half, 2 Octobers ago.
Mm-hmm.
She says, "Hey, I've got 15 minutes. Can you check me? I think the Lyme is back, And I was like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's back." And she was in her early 50s, so I thought, well, hey, she's my second patient I'm ever going to check this way. So I grabbed my vial and I'm going around her body, and I said, "Wow, you have the same problem your son has. You're not making
Mm-hmm.
energy in the joints." I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why the Lyme can live there, and I think that's why you're always having the shoulder pain and the
Yep.
hip pain. So I said, here's some cream for you. Here's some
Yeah.
copper for you. Home do the same thing. So I don't
Correct.
check her
Right.
at 2 months. I don't check her at 4 months. I don't check her at 6 months. At 8 months, it was middle of May. I think school just got out, so he was here at the end of May, and for his 8 month checkup. And she said, I think that Lyme is back. Could you check me? I'm like, sure. And so she gets on the table and I'm checking her. I go, yeah, got a little bit of it coming back there. And I grab my vial and go on her body. And I said, hey, there's something wrong here. I said, your son has complete energy in his joints. He's doing great. I had you guys do the same thing. I said, did you do what I asked you to do? And she looks down. She says, well, I didn't use that cream. I didn't like it. It was too much work.
Oh
And
gosh.
true story. Here's a 17-year-old. He's on his cell phone. He's looking down. He's like, Mom, it takes like a minute. So the 17-year-old son had
Oh,
religiously done the cream morning and night. He was going
yeah.
through it. He was ordering it, was sent to him, and she still
Yeah.
had her sitting at home. But she says, well, I did take the copper supplement. Okay, here's the interesting part.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest user of copper in the body, I think, are the heart, brain, kidneys, liver.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oddly,
Her
also
body
places
didn't
where
seem to have
iron.
a priority to fix the joints, but it was really all about how the
The,
body has a priority
mm-hmm.
system we don't even know
Mm-hmm.
about.
Oh yeah,
It
yeah.
was
Mm-hmm.
probably trying to find that,
Preserve the main
preserve the
organs.
vital stuff.
Yeah.
And my joke is I've never had a patient die of left knee pain,
Right. Yeah.
but I've had a lot of patients' left knees fail or right knees fail because they had Lyme there or a lack of energy there.
Sure. Yeah.
So I thought that was so interesting. It was just
That was an
N of one,
interesting,
N
that's
of
an,
one.
yes, N of one, but still, wow, what a great, you know,
Oh, now I can
comparison.
tell the people, I said, how's that cream going? Oh, I still got a half a thing. I said, well, that was 4 months ago. You should have been through 3 or 4 containers by now. Well, I'm just using it on my left knee. I go, what about the rest of your joints?
Yeah.
Well, they're not too bad. I said,
Yeah.
well, here's my rule. Only use the cream on the joints that you want to keep.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, we see the same problem all of the joints.
Yeah.
They're um, all low in copper.
Yeah.
They all seem to be holding glyphosate. They
Yep.
all seem to be low in the production of energy, and a
Yep.
lot of people have that chronic Lyme coming back. So the really neat part of all of this, discovering the copper deficiency in the joints and knowing to kind of build that cream up, was that now when I have patients use the cream with the Lyme, we're eliminating places in the body where Lyme can hide, because if
Mm-hmm.
you can drive the pathogens down, whatever you're using
Mm-hmm.
to do it, and you
Mm-hmm.
bring this mitochondrial function, the cellular energy up, and the white
Right.
blood cells have energy, they go, hey, I got this. And they can kind of hold that Lyme at bay. So I'm having much better luck
Mm-hmm.
with chronic joint Lyme really quieting. And I even have
Mm-hmm.
people rub it on the base of their skull and all
Sure.
kinds of things, because wherever it wants to live there. So that was a really neat find. And
It was really cool.
I could only find it because I was seeing patients live,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to do this really weird testing that I do on patients with the muscle testing.
Mm-hmm.
And people call me a quack quite often, and because that little buzzer
Yeah.
here goes quack, quack, squeak, squeak. But what it does for me is
Yeah.
it allows me to get one more window in, because I tell
Yeah.
people if they don't find it in your pee, they don't find it in your poop, they don't find it in your blood, by
Yeah.
definition, they're going to tell you it doesn't exist. Go see a
No.
psychologist.
No, man, it's so bad because the tissue's gonna hold things so, I mean,
Yeah,
clearly.
it hides it, right? It's not
Yeah.
directly in the bloodstream, so you have a concentration here, but you'll have less
Mm-hmm.
magnitudes less in the bloodstream, so then you're getting false positives.
Correct.
And
Mm-hmm.
I always jokingly say they
I
don't.
tell people, because we do toxin testing and everything in the urine, and I'm like, look, I'm just doing a urine test. I haven't checked hair, which will tell us tissue, and I'm not checking serum. Now I can, but it's more money. And I'm going to assume based on your history, this is your risk profile. If I don't see that in your urine, then I can assume that your body's hanging on to it and I need to do more work. If I do see it in your urine, that's good. Well, at least we're screening it, you know?
We're moving it,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's so
I
true.
jokingly say that no doctor will typically pull synovial fluid out of your joint and then culture it. And they don't
No,
put a needle in your brain and aspirate out and pull
no,
out fluid. So they're not going to check the areas where you don't have a direct blood supply. But
correct.
that's
Hmm.
exactly where chronic Lyme likes to hide.
That's so
And
true.
as an interesting story, I have two
So
different.
true.
I have a couple people that are pharmacists that I treat,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not.
Yeah, I believe it.
And and this one gal had to come in with her mother years ago, and her mom was early 70s with memory loss, pretty severe. She couldn't drive a car anymore, and she was struggling. And so she brought her up, and we just did what we did. Helped her drive the bugs down and turn the mitochondria back on. And 3 or 4 treatments, she was really that dull look in her eyes, that deer in the headlight was gone, and
Mm-hmm.
that sparkle had come back.
Mm-hmm.
And about 6 months later, I saw her in my office, and she said, well, I want you to treat me for Lyme. And I'm looking through her intake form. I go, you're a pharmacist? Yeah. Well, I think the comment was something about she had read all the papers on the antibiotics and felt like it didn't really do what they wanted it to do,
Yeah.
what she thought it would do.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's interesting, because a pharmacist literally has 8 years of chemistry.
Yes, they
The
do,
average
boy.
MD out there in practice has 1 semester of pharmacy, and
Well,
then they
let's just
work.
say this. I had 2 semesters of pharmacy and PA school, and I had 2 more in anesthesia school.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well, that's about a
Yeah.
year. That's about a year of chemistry,
And it's
pharmacology.
amazing how, and I had 1 semester of pharmacy when I was going through my schooling. I don't remember much of it, but I think the point is that the real deep chemistry, a somebody who has studied 4 years of chemistry, then went into school to study the pathways like that and gets that pharmacology degree.
Yeah,
They understand pathways, and it was really
they
interesting to
really
hear
do. Let me
her
tell
say
you.
that. I'm like, huh. And I couldn't disagree with her because I really felt like there was just
Yeah.
that 10 or 14 days of doxy just wasn't really getting rid of the
Oh.
Lyme.
Mm-mm.
And probably the bigger problem I saw with that too is that each form of Lyme seems to create a little bit different antibiotic requirement there. And if we try to do it with all one antibiotic, it
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
getting the other 2 or 3 that were sitting
Yeah.
behind. And
Right,
they
right,
weren't
right.
even in 2007, 2008, they weren't really testing for any of these other ones. They weren't even
Yeah.
known.
The bees, yeah, Bartonella. I've had
Yeah,
one come up with
it's,
parvo recently, and like, isn't that a
yeah,
dog? A
yeah,
dog pathogen? I'm
the
like,
virus.
yeah, but
Yeah,
they
there's so
bite
much out
dogs
there.
and they bite you. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even seen West Nile and the back,
West
like,
Nile, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's an incredibly wide-reaching illness. It has a lot of implications, and the numbers are definitely going up. At least it appears that way. I hear more and more people. Oh yeah, Lyme. Oh yeah, I know somebody with Lyme, and that was not the case 10 years ago. Like it was very uncommon.
I think what the testing has become, and when I first started, it was ELISA Western blot, and
Mm-hmm.
now Vibrant Labs has, IGenics has some. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many good companies
So
out there
many
that are
good
doing
companies.
so much
Yeah.
better testing,
100%.
that it's amazing what they can find today. But that wasn't available. So I think when the testing is getting better, then more doctors, PAs,
Mm-hmm.
MDs, chiropractor, anybody who's doing this testing says, "Ah, now I have a test that shows
Yeah.
that it's there."
Right, right.
Wow, now that's more validity.
Yeah, right, right.
I've had a couple of medical doctors come to my office that were friends of mine. And they said, "Yeah, I love what you do, but I get fired if I did that in my office because
Yeah.
it's so out of the box comparatively." But I was so desperate
Right.
uh, 15 years ago. The tests weren't there, that people were suffering. So I
Right.
kind of created my own technique or system that
Yeah,
would
yeah.
help me
I
identify where
think
it
the
was
muscle
hiding.
testing is amazing because what I love about muscle testing is that you take the vials across the organ systems and find where the priority of the burden
Yeah.
is, whether it's like you said, it's not converting from ADP to ATP, whether it's the Lyme in the brain versus the heart. I mean, cardiac Lyme is a real thing, causes all kind of conduction and
Oh yeah.
abnormalities. And now that you're talking about it, I wonder if those conduction abnormalities are related to some of that copper and glycine, collagen dysfunction. I've got to think about that a little bit because I know that's a real thing. Every single one of my Lyme people has some kind of dysrhythmia.
It's interesting. I just saw a friend of mine. He's a 40-year chiropractor, and I met him about 5 years ago, and he specializes in the cranial sacral technique. He's just amazing at his technique. He is on a 3 or 4 lead pacemaker now.
Mm,
He would collapse in his office,
mm,
and before he got the pacemaker, he finally went up. Grew up on a farm, out in
mm-hmm,
the woods all the time.
mm-hmm.
Wisconsin guy.
Oh yeah.
He was at Abbott Northwestern, and his cardiologist said, "If not, but for the Lyme, your heart would be perfect. It has ruined your electrical
Conduction
conduction
system.
of your heart." So
Correct. Hmm.
he would be dead if he had a pacemaker,
It's the
and they've had
number
to
one
replace
cause of
about
death in Lyme.
and anytime he gets a sniff of Lyme back at all,
Mm-hmm.
he just collapses. And so,
Wow.
about December, he could barely drive up here. I checked him quick. We told him what to take, and he says, I'm so glad you could check me that day. It took me about 6 weeks to climb back out of that hole
Mm-hmm.
because he's interacting with the medications. But his heart is so sensitive to the
Mm-hmm.
toxins when the
Mm-hmm.
bugs get active.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it was really, he's an exact example of somebody. And I've had people come in, Lyme,
Yeah.
ablation surgeries,
Oh
cutting
yeah.
nerve, cauterizing nerve, just craziness to try to get that rhythm back. And
Right.
so it's Lyme is so tricky in the sense that it can affect everybody differently. It's probably, if you went back
100%.
into the genetic profile on everybody, you'd see
Right.
what they can't methylate, what they can't hydroxylate,
Correct.
all these
It
little
is
genetic.
very, very uniquely like it's never exactly the same the way I treat any of them. Never.
And so you can have 100 symptoms on a page there, and they're
Hmm.
all kind of going back to the same category. But what's amazing is if you can get the drainage pathways open, if you
Hmm.
can get the pathogens down and turn the mitochondria back on, amazing things happen in these
Right.
patients.
That's
And
true.
there's no medication
100%.
that typically does that. I mean, there's,
No,
you know,
medications on the contrary do the opposite. They tax the mitochondria.
yeah, I always say, you know, when you take a medication, it's doing one or two things. It's either blocking a receptor or it's activating a receptor to have something happen in
And
the body.
it's often burning through nutrients. Let's be honest. Like usually
Yeah,
it's causing
what's that
kind of
book
a,
called Drug Muggers, where it tells you what each pharmaceutical drug steals from the body?
yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
It's like metformin. If you take metformin, you're going to be B12 deficient if you don't supplement. Things like that. Like,
Oh, I
yeah.
did not know that one. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah, and that's a very common drug. So, and it's pretty popular now in the longevity space. So, hopefully those,
yeah, yeah. I don't know what it's doing, but I think it's working on the
insulin
complex one or
sensitivity.
something, doing something to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So really interesting, but so there is all this complexity and why one person's treatment plan is never the same as the next person is because of all that variability. It's yes, the mitochondria is always an issue, but everybody's exposure is different, environment is different, genetic hardware is different. I like to say,
yeah.
I say that the genes are your hardware because I know people ask me all the time. They're like, "Oh, well, should I get a genetic test? Should I get all these genetic tests?" The only testing I really do is methylation testing because it helps a whole lot with a lot of the things I need to plan on for directly treating things. But other than that, I find that, I describe it as hardware and software. You have your hardware, your genetic hardware that you were born with, and maybe that codes for a potential for MS or pick something, Parkinson's. But then you have your software, and that software is everything epigenetic. And we know that you got a computer with hardware, but you got no software to drive it. It's not going to do anything, And so the software is what's telling your body what to do with those genes. Now, if you give it good software, like good B vitamins and nutrient and light, it's going to do great, and you're not going to have this turn on of bad genes or but if you give it toxins, glyphosate, Lyme, and processed food, and stay inside with artificial light, well, the hardware is going to code
Yeah,
a certain
I
way.
think what we forget quite often, or what, oh, like the average person walking the street or watching this video, is that if you take, and you talked about earlier how we're a flex fuel vehicle, we can take a sugar, a carb, excuse me, carbs, fats, or protein, and we can run on any one of those fuels for a long time. And it runs through the pathway, they plug in a little bit different spots, but it's about, if you take a molecule of sugar, I believe it's 22 enzymatic changes, 22 or 24, and every one of those enzymes has a coenzyme and a cofactor, a vitamin and a mineral, a vitamin and a
So
mineral.
incredible. I
So
know.
if you're missing that vitamin or that mineral, everything slows down.
Yeah.
Or what if you
Or
have
stops.
a chemical in there that actually poisons the enzyme?
I take
A good
people and I
example
show them
is
that
I
Krebs
always tell
cycle.
people,
I'm like, look,
what's
that's where
that?
mercury. I tell people that all the time. I'm showing them the Krebs cycle. I'm like, I don't get scared about this. We're not focusing on necessarily you learning all the things, but look at how many times you need magnesium. Boom, 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 boom. Look what happens when you get mercury. Boom, 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 boom. Like, it's
Yeah,
blocking everything. That's why it's
yeah, and
important.
I tell my patients, I said, if you want to kill somebody quickly, you just give them a sniff of cyanide gas, and in 15 seconds, the heart
Yeah,
stops.
that's right.
And they're like, what? And in this area up here, a lot of farmers, not so many anymore, they've been wiped out, but the small dairy farms used to have a lot of silos and manure pit rooms, and so these gases, I've had neighbors of mine, people I graduated with, one guy graduated with just 8 or 10 years ago, um, went into an area where there was a manure pit storage, and he walked in there and the gas came up, one breath, killed him, killed his son.
Phew.
And my neighbors have had, and it was just terrible. The third one was going to go in, one breath, and they knocked him out. And they were, I don't know what kind of gas it was. If it was methane, but the silo gas is much the same. One intake of that, and if you're lucky, you can get out of it. But most people will pass out and they'll die there. And I've had several deaths around here
Oh, wow.
because after 48 hours of that up on top fermenting and that little bit of mold takes off, that's why you these old stave silos, you fill the silo, turn the blower on, and immediately go up there and level it and start to feed out of it. It's amazing how fast a gas can kill a person.
Yes.
I would say gases are extremely fast. Liquids are less, and then solids are a little slower, if you took a
Yeah, 100%.
capsule of something.
Yeah, yeah,
And I see that. So that's just a direct poisoning of the mitochondria, and
100%.
the heart
Yeah.
will stop, or some other part of the body will stop
Uh,
conducting. And
yeah.
yeah,
So true. You just said, I'm sorry, I'm totally being ADHD. You mentioned mold, how it's fermenting, but mold is another key piece. We were saying at the beginning of this podcast how your vitamin D deficiency can go down, and any kind of major trigger can set off our trigger for
right.
Lyme to go crazy. Mold. Let's finish this podcast and talk a little bit about mold and
Yeah.
how that affects our trigger for Lyme, because that is a big
I
thing.
didn't look for mold until probably 4 or 5 years ago, when I was working with my friend Todd Watts in Silcor, and he asked me. He's like, "Can you do study on mold and maybe make a vial?" And I said, "Sure." So I started testing my patients, and I had a gentleman coming up from Chicago. I'll never forget this. He came up and I had treated him for Lyme, and he was doing better. But he said, my brain just isn't turning back on. And I had developed this little vial, had 40 different frequencies of mold in it, the mycotoxins, and I was checking him, and it was all over his sinuses and his brain. I mean, all over his brain. And I
Hmm.
said to him, I said, "When you go home, could you please?" And I checked his wife, and she was in the room with him, and she had the same
Thing.
places she was hiding the mold. I said, "I think somewhere in your house there's mold." And they
Hmm.
did one of these, and I said, "Just look around, go on the basement. You got a basement?" Yep. So I didn't hear from him for about 8 weeks. He came back up, and he strolls into my room, big smile on his face. He says, "I love you, but you cost me $15,000. What did I do?" He says, "You were right." He said, "I went home. I started looking for the mold." He said, "Behind my furnace was the bathroom, and where the shower pan was, it was leaking, and there was mold all the way around the pan down there." And he
Mm-mm-mm.
said it was being pulled into the furnace. Yeah.
Oh
And he
my
said
gosh.
he said it
Just
cost me. And so I had found the mold, and I was using a humic fulvic product, and it seemed to clean him up. And he said, "I feel the best I've felt in 20 years."
oh my goodness.
And I was choked up. He was choked up. His wife was choked up, because when
Yeah.
you take somebody who's literally, his daughter would say, "Dad, are you okay?" He said, "I'd be talking to my daughter, and I would lose the words. I couldn't finish the sentence. I couldn't find the word." And he was only in his mid-50s, right? He's not an old person.
Yep.
But that was the piece I was missing. So when you have Lyme and mold together,
Mm.
it's just
It,
devastating to the brain,
it
and
is.
you have to work on removing that. And
Mm-hmm.
if you can do that, amazing things happen.
Amen. So true. Lyme, mold, parasites, the three musketeers.
Yeah.
It's the truth. So what do we do? How do we fix all that?
Well, we talked about earlier is I had developed 4 or 5 products for Lyme specifically, and I've so when people talk about Lyme, I think I've tested 70,000 times now. I've tested patients.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, some of them are the same patients because they've been patients in my office for 15 years.
All right.
And I think I've probably done more Lyme checks one-on-one than maybe anybody in the country. I say that because I've been doing it for 17 years, and I do it every day, about 4,000 times a year.
You're right.
And seeing that, I see the patterns. And I think when you do something so much, it almost becomes like a sixth sense, like part of you
Oh yeah.
almost.
100%.
And and I can come in and just listen to a patient now and go, "Okay, I need to check for ABC and check here, here, and here." And
Yep.
so we always try to, when we treat Lyme, we develop these formulas. They're LSF 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Mm-hmm.
and then we use basic detox stuff, much like you do probably.
Mm-hmm.
And we always apply the cream up front, because we always want to bring mitochondrial function up. Because I always tell people, if you made perfect energy in all your cells, Lyme couldn't exist there, because your immune
Right.
system would say, "I got this. I got
Yep.
this." So I
Yep.
say, well, the most important things is to get these toxins down. And a lot of people that come in, they come in with that bag of nutrition. I mean, they got a bag like
Yep. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
25, 30 bottles, and I got everything here. And what's really interesting is that a lot of times there'll be a toxin, like the Lyme toxin, the mold toxin, a heavy metal. And I
Mm-hmm.
always say, if you're trying to get down the pathway, you're going A, B, C, D, E, and I want to get to G to make energy, and there's this big toxin in the way, I have to take more and more B vitamins and more minerals to
Yep.
just get. I said, sometimes it's easier to go in there and just grab that toxin and get it out of the
Get it
way,
out.
and then
Yeah,
it really moves so nicely again. And I
that's
think that's
right.
the biggest mistake probably that you see that I see in practice is people are really trying hard and other doctors are trying hard. But I tell people it's much easier to grab all the toxins that are blocking you and help get rid of those.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yes.
everything seems to reset itself very
Yeah.
nicely versus taking more B vitamin,
Yeah.
more magnesium.
That's what I see.
And
I
you,
see a lot of times. I see either they're band-aiding with a whole bunch of supplement, like a whole bunch of B's, C's, D's, name it, like you said, orthomolecular approach,
yeah,
boom, Band-Aid.
yeah.
Band-Aid, but never getting over it.
It's
Or
helpful. It's not behind that. It's
it's
why
not
do you need
fixing
to
the,
take
right.
100 times the
It's the
recommended
keep
B6 every
asking
day?
why, but why, but why, but why, but why, but why. You know,
Right.
that's what
Yeah,
that's my thing. But why? And then
right.
the other, or I see people start killing too soon. Like they kill bugs too soon without removing opening drainage and, you know, make sure we're detoxing well and efficiently. And now we just recirculate all this endotoxin that we create when we go after bugs aggressively
Right.
before we can. So
Right.
those are the two things I see that are
Yeah.
off
Um,
base a million ways from Sundays.
when
And a
I
lot of
started,
times these chronic people that come to me with Lyme, they have
yeah,
been getting killers for so long and they're declining. And I'm like, yes, but because what are we doing about detox? What are we doing about gut health? What are we doing? What in the world are you, what kind of protocol is this? You know, I mean,
yeah,
and they're on the downslide because the body cannot handle more toxic burden if we haven't opened that drainage. One of the first things I did for my son when he got sick with Lyme was buy a sauna. I
oh
could not
wow,
detox
okay,
him because, you know, I give him glutathione, I give him all these things, but it was not enough. He had so much burden. I just needed passive sweat. I put him in a sauna, and that helped so much. And then that lowered it enough that we could start getting more on top of it with the glutathione. Then we could get after it with the, the,
and I
you
think
know, the
people
bugs.
forget sometimes that there's 5 or 6 major detox pathways. We always probably want to pee it out first.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we use a bowel movement and poop it out.
Mm-hmm.
We could sweat it out, spit it out, and
Mm-hmm.
breathe it out. And
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, you can use as many of those pathways as possible. It's really funny.
Yep.
A person with a chronic indigestion problem,
Mm-hmm.
uh, maybe it's candida or parasites down there, these toxins, and they'll always be congested. Oh, this
Yes.
mucus coming out because the body's
Always.
trying to throw it out to the mucal glands.
That's right.
Or you'll just smell, when I sweat,
Okay.
oh man, I just smell. And one of the most common things people would say is, I didn't know I had that Lyme, but that ammonia smell you talk about. When I would
Oh,
sweat,
yeah.
I would smell that ammonia. And I said, yeah, one of the
Yes.
most common toxins that these pathogens kick out is ammonia. So I use a ammonia vial checking around the body, and that's
Oh,
my
yeah.
baseline check if I can see if the bugs are active. So
Right.
we use a lot of just L-glutamine too. It's a great scavenger for the ammonia, works really
Oh, yeah.
well and pulls it
Oh,
out
yeah.
so well for people.
Sure
But
does.
I tell people that in the end game, when we first put these tinctures together years ago, 15, 16 years ago, I didn't know at the time, but when I was selecting these herbs, a lot of them were liver supportive, kidney supportive,
Mm-hmm.
drainage supportive. And
Uh-huh.
so I was trying to, because I knew so little about how this all worked,
Right,
I
right,
was
right.
just trying to find, so then I started putting all these herbs in one bottle, and I
Mm.
got chastised by a lot of herbalists, like, you can't put 12 herbs in a, you should never mix them together. I go, well, they all kind of test synergistically, and what I've really learned, so we started steeping herbs years and years ago. We were probably one of the first ones to do it 16, 17 years ago. We put 10, 12, 14 herbs into a huge vat, add the alcohol in the water, let it steep, and
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, push it off. Um, but we were able to do so much with one bottle because it wasn't just a killer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think that's the biggest mistake I would say. I have people come in and they've got some wormwood and they've got some clove and they've got
Yeah.
some artemisia, and they're
Mm-hmm.
taking crazy amounts of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned over the years, it seems like, is if you can do a little bit of both, do a little bit of killing, a
Yep.
little bit of binding, a little bit of liver
Yep.
support,
Yep.
And so that's what we started out with, and it's really worked well for us. So we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to chase down the pathways quite so much. Um, and my practice is, again, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, a bunch of farm fields around me.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get people to have labs. I'm not in a big city, so
Yeah.
I would always use my vial testing, and
Yeah.
I would send out for some basic labs. And what was frustrating with me is the blood work would almost, I could have the sickest person on my table, and the blood work would almost show that they were healthy.
Your blood work is normal. I always tell people, I'm like, you know that meme where you got the guy in the casket and the doctor's there saying, but your blood work is normal. you know, it's like that. That is so the Lyme story.
I think what I finally came up with is when I learned how to use ADP and ATP and check the Krebs cycle, I can check it each step of the way, how I
Yeah.
make energy. I tell people, patients come in, I say, look, if you went into any doctor out there and you said, I want you to tell me how my cells make energy, how effective they are. My brain cells, my heart cells, they'd
Yeah.
say, we don't have a test for that.
I know.
And they don't. They
They
do
don't.
not have a test to
That's
tell you
not.
how much ATP you're
They
making. And
don't. No.
one thing that people should know is if you weigh 150 pounds, on average, you need to make 150 pounds of ATP just to stay alive.
Oh my
I'm not talking about fighting Lyme. I'm not
gosh.
talking about going for a 3 mile. You make your body's weight in ATP every day.
That's
And I say,
amazing.
if you choose to do nothing and have a Netflix day,
Yeah.
maybe it's 160 pounds. But if you're trying to go to work, raise kids, exercise,
Kill bacteria in your body.
no bacteria, you
Yeah.
can't do it. So I tell people the most important thing you can do is you turn your mitochondria back on, because in the end, no matter what you or I do for this patient,
Mm-hmm.
they have to get on top of that. They have to have enough energy to
Yep.
keep any infection under control. And I think what's really
Right.
coming down to is it's finding that point where they can hold everything at bay, whether it's a cancer cell,
Yeah.
whether it's, and then we didn't talk about this at all, but what's really interesting, when we learned applied kinesiology in school, they
Mm-hmm.
always talked about the triad of health, the three
Yep.
sides, and one side was emotional, one side was chemical, then
Yep.
of course your bottom side is your, chiropractically we call it structure or physiology,
Right.
and you cannot separate those three sides out. And
Mm-mm.
I found that a lot of people, and I did this muscle testing, it's really easy to do, if they come into my office and say, hey, hold up your arm, say, I want to be well, statement to the body, they're almost 99%, 100% are strong, they want to be well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say this question to them, say, I believe I can be well and fully functional again. And down goes the arm.
Yeah. Right.
Because they have become so hopeless and helpless
Yes.
over the years of being sick. The
Yep.
want is there, but the belief has been lost.
Yes. 100%.
So I actually work with some emotional stuff now to help them
Yes.
reset their
Yeah.
neurology in a matter of about 5 minutes,
Yeah.
where you retest that answer, that
Mm-hmm.
question and the answer, and they're finally strong to it, because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us forget about that emotional piece.
No, I know. It's
Obviously
a
the
big
mind
mis-
controls the matter.
Yeah.
And I said, from the time sperm bumps in the egg until today, whatever
Yeah.
age you are,
Yeah.
everything we experience in life, we wrap an emotion around it,
Yes, we
and then we
do.
store it in our heart, or put it in our brain, or put it,
Correct.
can't stomach
Body
something.
keeps the score.
That's a
Body
great
keeps
book.
the
Yeah.
score.
And that's the
Yeah.
truth. And so if you can help them release the emotion or the
Mm-hmm.
disbelief
Yeah.
and keep the experience, we call that wisdom, right?
Right.
And that's a great thing to do, because if we can help them release the heavy emotion to some kind of trauma they had, now it's just an experience. It doesn't
Right.
have to, every time they think about it, goes down in their body and they become weak from it. They
Right.
start to, and they actually spin the Krebs cycle backwards. There's a,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever heard of reverse Krebs cycle.
I have heard that.
So our cells should use oxygen and make
Mm-hmm.
energy. And
Mm-hmm.
when our cell runs backwards, we use carbon dioxide in the cell instead of oxygen.
Yep.
And every cancer cell uses carbon dioxide instead of oxygen, and
Yep.
primarily sugar. And
Yep.
so, not to get too far off point,
But
but
we make a lot of
Hammer in
ammonia with
Germany
that.
back in the 70s was an oncologist that discovered
What was his name?
in Hammer.
Uh-huh.
It's called German New Medicine, if you look it up.
Mm-hmm.
He was an oncologist in a German hospital, and he would come in and take intake form. And so tell me about your life. Oh, trauma 10 years ago, trauma 12 years ago,
Yep.
trauma, cancer. Huh. And then he started doing MRIs, and he'd find lesions in the brain. If he found a
Yep.
ring lesion here, he'd say the cancer was here. If he found the ring lesion over here, the cancer would be down here. because he had all these tools available, he could map it. And as he helped people process the emotional stuff they were carrying, I can't remember, some crazy amount, like 90-some% of cancer would literally go away.
I know. Such
Because
an
the reverse
important
Krebs
book.
cycle and he didn't know about the reverse Krebs cycle. He just simply knew that the emotions seemed to be more powerful than anything he could give him chemo. Isn't it
Mm,
funny how people get chemotherapy and they
yeah.
just can't get through it sometimes?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Incredible. There's so much here. Oh my gosh, I want to keep talking so much, but we're at an hour and 20 minutes, and I'm sure people are like, "Ooh, I had to put pause on this for a minute because there's so much information I want to digest." And I mean, it's just a great conversation. I want to bring you back on because I could talk some more about all that. And we didn't even talk about Babesia or Bartonella or any of those goodies that we love to come
Yeah, we could
alongside
do a deep dive on
Lyme.
that, but I think we both kind of see the same thing in our patients where I've learned that it's not enough to try to kill. That's probably your biggest mistake. You have to support all the detox pathways, and probably even the bigger thing is that little hidden
Emotion.
piece of copper and trying to put back into the pathway normal mitochondrial function, whatever that looks. And usually with a little bit of magnesium, some B vitamins, and the thing will turn back on. But you
Yeah.
have to find the root cause, and that's often is hidden Lyme, hidden
Yep.
mold,
Yep.
leaking amalgams.
Yeah. Oh
You
my
know,
gosh.
I'm a quack for telling my patients around here those 12 fillings that are now black in your mouth instead of being shiny silver are
Yeah.
leading to that. Oh, one other thing. Um, when I get a really chronic patient in that has had several root canals or problems in their teeth,
Oh yeah.
I take my vial and I'll scan the jaw for
Oh yeah.
Lyme or Babesia or Bartonella.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just dumbfounded by the amount of spots. Right there. Oh, I had a root canal there. Oh, I had a root canal. I had one there too. And I say, there's a
Wow.
machine out there in the dental office called a cone beam.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And when you have a chronic patient, or if you're a chronic patient and you just can't get over the hump, you go and do a cone beam. And I've had patients find up to 4 really bad infections in their teeth,
Oh
where
yeah.
it's a failed root canal. And
Yes.
fortunately, it's
I did a
almost always
podcast
out.
called Getting to the Root Cause, and we talk about the teeth and had a biological dentist come on and talk about that. And it's where that's my number one referral in my practice is to a biological dentist.
It's bigger than I think you would imagine. I've had several patients that
Yes.
I couldn't find really any Lyme left in them, but
Mm-hmm.
that tooth was rotten in there, and they'd pull
Mm-hmm.
the 2 main ones out within days.
Poof.
And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it blows my mind that an infection in the jaw could cause a systemic
So
just
much.
this feeling
Yes.
of not
Yeah.
being well.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
incredible. And it's something you don't want to miss. Don't miss above the collar. Don't miss
Oh,
above the
so
collar.
one time I was at a seminar teaching and I said, sometimes you got to treat between the ears before you can treat below the ears.
Oh,
And
that's
I got
so
in trouble
true.
for that.
But
And I
it's
read
true.
between the ears, you got to look at the emotions, you have to look at the jaw. And
Mm-hmm.
and I always felt like if I could help someone's brain turn back on and feel better,
Mm-hmm.
then everything else would fall in line quite
Yeah.
often.
Yeah, and then
And
also
because
what's in there is just demystifying misinformation, like getting real information into that head, right? Having people empowered with knowledge that they aren't crazy. That's one thing, because they really do feel that way, and that there is a scientific reason behind why they feel that way. So that's also true between here, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's a huge piece. Having some hope,
I think
but
it's
it's pretty
everything,
powerful.
honestly. And when they come in feeling hopeless and helpless, if you can help them release some of that emotions, trauma they're carrying, and just say, look, if we follow these steps logically, there's no reason you can't get well. And you're probably finding this for the first time. No one else has looked for it. I mean, I can't tell the number of people have come in and, oh, they have looked for it. And said, well, they checked for Lyme 4 years ago and they didn't find anything. What tests? They did a Western blot. Oh, yeah. And
Yeah,
then you start checking and you see all this there and the mold there, and it's
yeah,
all walled off and it's just chewing them up, and they might even be down that neurological pathway. They're starting to have
sure.
some neurological symptoms. It's really nice to see it, but it's really heartbreaking to know that they have gone a long way,
Long time.
years in the wrong direction. And I tell them, you've been sick for, like I said, Lyme can live in your body. I had it for 20 years probably. Well, no, 25 years before I found it myself and then began to treat. And then because there was no test in 1981
Right.
when I got bit,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. It's incredible.
And a lot of them, the doctors will say, it's all in your head. You need to go see a psychologist.
I
There's no,
know.
and that's really disheartening to them because a lot of them will go there
Yeah, they
and
will.
then they get put on a medication almost
And now that
immediately,
complicates some of the herbal treatments, believe me. That makes it a little harder to just go.
when they, how they say the gut's a second brain. We could talk about that in the vagus nerve and all this stuff. Is that one thing that I'll mention that we could do a whole podcast on glyphosate at some point.
Oh,
When
definitely.
glyphosate
Please.
comes in, when they first it came out with it in the patented in the 80s and they started using it. They said we can do this in the human body. It won't be on the food because there is no pathway in the human body that mimics this bacteria pathway that we're knocking out in the plant. So they got passed. But what they didn't recognize is that we have, on average, say 1,000 colonies of bacteria in our gut system. Half of those bacteria have that shikimate. It's called the shikimate pathway. And so when the glyphosate comes in, it literally decolonizes half the
Half of the
gut
bacteria.
the half the colonies in you. So about 500 of the 1,000 are affected by glyphosate when it comes in on the wheat and it comes in on the oats and this corn and the soy
Exactly.
and your sweet
Yep.
potatoes and your white potatoes and it comes in 80 foods. When it comes in, it strips the mineral, it poisons the mitochondria, and now we see less fatty acids being made, less amino acids being made, less
Less
B
short
vitamins
term. Yeah.
being made. And so all of a sudden I have a loss of phenylalanine. I can't make my GABA. I have a loss of tyrosine being made in my gut. I
Yep.
can't make my dopamine, and I
Right.
have a loss of tryptophan. There goes my serotonin.
Right.
And so then I'm put on a medication that doesn't restock my good bacteria and my amino acids. It simply doesn't let me break down what I can make, and I am stuck in this just this void of kind of a neutrality where I don't have the highs or lows, but I can't get off it because I can't make it. And that's again getting to the root cause again.
Exactly. Root cause medicine. That's what we call it. I know
Right.
somebody coined that, and it's technically a trademarked name, but that's what we do is root cause investigation, I guess.
Get
Yeah.
into the deepest cause underneath all of that, and
Why? But why?
and I think we talked about earlier on it. If you could go back to 1950 and look at what was there, I think everything was pretty much 1950. Everything was organic, right? And then after the war, we created a lot of chemicals in the war, like pesticides and different things to knock these jungles out and whatnot. And they went right into the agricultural programs and they started spraying them as atrazines, and then they became fungicides, and then from there more herbicides. And so we started challenging the body with more chemicals. We've made something like 80,000 chemicals since 1950.
Yes. It's
But we
insane.
actually had to invent the word conventional.
Uh-huh.
If you think about that, right? So I come from a farming background, and I remember my dad parking the cultivator that would go through the field and pluck the weeds out, parking against the fence row in about 81, 82. Out came the big boom sprayer and spraying all the crops. And the guy's like, "Oh, this stuff is you can drink, it's just fine, you know."
Yeah.
So then we started spraying stuff, and then not long after we started delineating between organic and conventional. Isn't that interesting?
That is
There was
interesting.
no word before that I know of. Everything was organic.
Yeah.
And the hard part about organic, and I hate to hurt anybody's feelings out there, but it's really hard to find a field that was never sprayed with chemicals,
Yes,
or
I
doesn't
know.
have drift, or doesn't come through the rain.
I know.
So I say, but we probably
It's
have
not
out there is
perfect.
conventional and less conventional.
Less
'Cause Don
conventional.
Huber taught me,
Yeah.
agronomist, Dr. Don Huber, he said, when I go out to a field that's been sprayed for years, he said, the glyphosate on a light soil, like a sandy soil, will take 25 years to degrade and break apart. He said in a heavy clay soil, it'll take over 30 years. I can find 90+% of the sprays that are still there in the soil years later. Isn't that crazy?
That's
So it
insane.
sprayed on the plant, so it's a
Yeah.
whole other podcast,
That's a
but
whole
it's
nother
interesting
podcast on that,
because
but that's definitely a piece. We talk about
yeah,
that.
so that's what we
I
see
still
is
encourage
yeah,
organic food because I'm like, it's
yeah,
less dangerous. I
yeah.
encourage
It's
growing your own
absolutely
food if you can.
right.
You
It's
know,
absolutely how we should start. And so I think the whole thing about food is know your source.
know your source.
If you can grow local, buy local, and support local, that's good because you can talk to the farmer.
Mm-hmm.
You can, I have 4 acres of blueberries here. They get to be quarter
Wow.
size, and I use a lot of fertilizer on them. And so we don't classify them as organic because a lot of organic crops you're not allowed to spray. But I test my soil, I test my leaves every year, and I put exactly onto that crop what's missing. And what
Mm,
I found is that if I can get everything there, you have this amazing tasting blueberry I cannot buy in the store.
you cannot.
And so it's not so hard it's easy to not use herbicides,
Right.
but to really test that plant down to know what the copper level is and the boron, the
Mm-hmm.
manganese, and selenium, and
Mm-hmm.
cobalt. I mean, it's such a
So
dance there.
satisfying too.
It's such a
We're
dance
going
that
into regenerative farming now. Okay, we have to pause. We have to stop because I could talk about that forever. But I'm having such a great time. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been a great conversation, and I think there's
you're
something
welcome.
for everyone who is struggling with chronic disease. Anybody listening, not just a Lyme person, can learn something from this podcast. So thank you so much for like the years of serving people in this space and just the amount of information you've shared today. It's been a great conversation.